Chapter 13, in which they return to the enchanted forest at last. They told Telemaine and Jack the whole story over dinner and discussed it late into the night. Telemaine was intrigued by their description of Kazul's imprisonment. "You say these wizards have an enchantment capable of confining a dragon?" he said eagerly. "Are you sure?" "That's certainly what it looked like," Cimmerian said, pouring herself a cup of hot chocolate. The stew and the dinner dishes had long since been cleared away and were piled in buckets of soapy water, waiting for someone to have the time or inclination to wash them. Mendenbar wondered idly whether a bucket of soapy water plus lemon juice plus dishes would do as good for melting wizards as one without dishes, and what effect the dishes would have on the process. Being melted was probably not very comfortable, but being melted while cups and plates and forks were falling on your head was likely to be even less so. "I knew I was right to join you," Telemaine said, smiling. "I might not have heard about this enchantment at all if I hadn't. It sounds like a simple modulation of the upper frequencies of the standard reptilian restraint spell, but an enormously increased scale. I wonder where they're getting the power." "I don't care how they did it," Cimmerian snapped. "I care about getting Kazul out of it as soon as possible." "A trivial detail, once the construction of the spell is properly understood," Telemaine said confidently. "Trivial?" Mendenbar said. "Aren't you forgetting about the wizards? I don't think they'll just let us walk in and take their spell apart." "And goodness knows what they'll do with Kazul in the meantime," Cimmerian muttered. "Nonsense," Telemaine said. "I comprehend your concern, but it's highly unlikely that this episode will prove more than a minor inconvenience so far as your dragon friend is concerned." Cimmerian did not look convinced. So Telemaine launched into a lecture on the political implications of the situation, the main point of which was that it would be stupid for the Society of Wizards to hurt Kazul, and that wizards weren't stupid. Privately, Mendenbar thought that it had been stupid of the wizards to kidnap Kazul in the first place, but saying so would not reassure Cimmerian, so he kept quiet. After a while, Telemaine finished his lecture. He did not wait for Cimmerian to respond, but turned at once to Mendenbar and asked about his sword. Like Cimmerian, the magician could feel the sword spilling magic, like a beacon on a mountaintop, and he was amazed and completely fascinated to learn that Mendenbar noticed nothing unusual. "I don't understand why I didn't stop it at once," Telemaine said, shaking his head over his cup of hot chocolate, which looked to Mendenbar as if it had gone cold during his long speech about the relative intelligence of wizards. "You mean when you met us?" Cimmerian said. "Mendenbar's sword wasn't spraying magic all over right then. He just used up most of it on the rock snakes." "It seems to recover quickly," Telemaine said with a sidelong look at the sword. "Is it always like this?" "How should I know?" Mendenbar said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I can tell when it's doing it, much less when it isn't." "Yes, you said that before." Telemaine sipped at his chocolate, staring absently into space. "I shall have to think about it for a while," he said at last, as though making a profound announcement. "It is a pity that you haven't time to visit my tower for a few tests." "Absolutely not," Mendenbar interrupted. "We have to rescue Kazul from the wizards," Cimmerian put in quickly, "before this business turns into more than a minor inconvenience. Before those wizards decide that she's too much trouble to keep around and feed her some dragon's bane." Telemaine considered this for a minute. "An excellent idea," he said at last, with evident sincerity. Mendenbar and Cimmerian stared at him. "If the Society of Wizards poisons the King of the Dragons, there is certain to be war," Telemaine explained. "Wars are very distracting, so I don't like being distracted. Therefore, it would be very good if we made sure that there was no war." "I'm glad you think so," Cimmerian said. Her voice sounded a little strange. The discussion continued for a little longer, but it was getting late and everyone was tired. Finally, Jack suggested that they all go to bed. It's all very well for you adventurous types to sit around drawing until past midnight, but some people have to do work in the morning, he said pointedly. I'm not an adventurous type, Telemaine said with dignity. I am in research. Fine, fine, Jack said. So go research my second best bed. You and the king here take the room on the right. Princess Cimmerian gets the one on the left, and I get to bunk under the kitchen. Good night, everybody. That settled things for the evening. But the conference continued the next morning over breakfast of flapjacks and honey. It seems very likely to me that you are correct about Kazul's position, Telemaine said. She's probably best held somewhere in the enchanted forest. Our first task, therefore, must be to find her. Our first task is to get back to the enchanted forest, Mendenbar corrected. I don't even know which direction it's in anymore. It's over that way, Jack said, waving at the large mountain in back of his house. Not far if you're flying, but a long way to walk. You have to go around, you see. Now, I've got a nice broomstick that'll get you there in the jiffy. It's extra long, so it'll seat all three of you comfortably, and it's hardly been used at all. No, thank you, Jack, Telemaine said friendly. Broomsticks are only a reliable transportation for witches. We'll manage this ourselves. Pass the flapjacks, please. Here, said Cimmerian, handing him the plate. Do you mean that you're going to take us to the enchanted forest the same way that you brought us here? I thought it would be harder than that. Actually, it is, Telemaine said. The enchanted forest is unique, magically speaking, and therefore the interface between the forest and the rest of the world is also unique. Penetrating that interface requires a specific application. What's that mean? When it's at home? Said Jack. You need a special spell to get into the enchanted forest because it's different from everywhere else. Telemaine was irritated. Exactly. So that's why Mendenbar's spell dropped us into the ravine of rock stakes instead of the forest? Cimmerian asked. Possibly, Telemaine frowned. Seems unlikely, however. Mendenbar's magic is of the same variety as that of the forest, and it should have worked perfectly well, assuming it worked at all. Then why didn't it? Mendenbar asked. He was getting tired of puzzles, especially puzzles connected to his sword, his magic, and his forest. I'm afraid I can't answer that from your description, Telemaine replied, his frown deepening. I can think of half a dozen things that might have gone wrong, but without seeing it myself, I don't know which one of them it was. So do it again and watch this time, Jack said. Hand me the honey, would you, your majesty? Mendenbar picked up the honey pot, which was shaped like a fat purple bear. Resisting the urge to throw it at Jack's head, he handed it over and said mildly, I don't think I like the idea of repeating the spell. Last time it knocked me out for a few hours, and I'm not wanting to do that again, just so Telemaine can figure out why. Oh, that's easy enough to fix, Telemaine said. A few words properly set, and there won't be any backlash to worry about. How much backlash does it take before you worry about it? Cimmerian said, sounding dubious about the entire idea. A 3-day headache. And that's only because if Telemaine's head hurts, he has trouble thinking about the wherefore and the what's it. Magic. Oh, that's a serious exaggeration, Telemaine said stiffly, and I don't anticipate that this experiment would result in any kind of prolonged effect, particularly if I set wards first. I had some idea of what to expect, you see, so I can customize the shielding spells corresponding with the type of backlash. That sounds good, Cimmerian said. But what happens if it doesn't work? Telemaine began a long, involved, and somewhat indignant explanation of why his shielding spells could not fail to work. Mendenbar listened with only part of his mind. The rest was busy thinking about Telemaine's suggestion. It looked to him as if the only way they were getting back into the enchanted forest was by means of his own magic. Telemaine hadn't actually said he couldn't do it himself, but Mendenbar was fairly sure that that's what he had meant. And from the way that Jack talked, walking would take more time than they had to spare. Even if it took Telemane 2 tries or 3 to figure out what had gone wrong with Mendenbar's transportation spell, they would still be much faster than walking. Of course, they could always rent some of Jack's wares, but after their experience with the magic carpet, Mendenbar was not happy at all with that idea. Repeating the spell would be a chance to find out more about the sword, too. His adventures since leaving the Enchanted Forest had made Mendenbar see just how little he really knew about his own magic, and the sword seemed like a good place to start finding things out. The only question was, could the words keep him from being knocked out? Telemane, how sure of these shielding spells are you? Mendenbar asked as soon as there was a lull in the conversation. Telemane looked at him. Very sure indeed. I have just spent no little time and breath telling Princess Cimmerian here how very sure it is, why I am sure, and how unlikely it is that I am wrong. Obviously, you've not been attending. Do you wish me to repeat the entire explanation? I wouldn't want him to. Oh, no, of course not, Mendenbar said hastily. I'm sorry I wasn't listening, but I had to think for a moment. And? Cimmerian said. And I think we should do it, as long as Telemane is sure he can keep me from being knocked out again. I am, Telemane said, sounding faintly put out. I have been telling you that all morning. Good, said Jack. I like to have things settled. You sure you don't want a pair of 7-league boots for backup? There are 3 of us, and you only have 1 pair of boots, Cimmerian pointed out. So they finished breakfast quickly and helped Jack clear up. Telemane had some things to discuss with Jack, so Mendenbar and Cimmerian went outside to give them a chance to talk alone. Mendenbar noticed the worry line between Cimmerian's eyebrows was back. What's the matter? He asked. Are you sure about this? Cimmerian said. Doing the transportation spell, I mean, after what happened before. I'll be more careful this time, Mendenbar said, and Telemane's words should help. Between the 2 of us, it ought to be all right. Cimmerian didn't look convinced. You're still taking a big chance, and there are other ways to get to the Enchanted Forest. Not in a hurry, there aren't, Mendenbar said. And once we get back, we still have to find Kazul. We can't afford to waste any more time. I know. Cimmerian chewed on her lower lip, frowning. Look, you're the king of the Enchanted Forest. You shouldn't be taking chances on this just to help me out. I like helping you out, Mendenbar said, but it's not just that. It's my job to take care of the Enchanted Forest, and the wizards have Kazul somewhere in my kingdom. It's my responsibility. You're not responsible for what the Society of Wizards does. No, but when it involves the forest, it involves me too, and I have to try to put it straight. No wonder you looked so tired when you showed up at Kazul's cave. Mendenbar. The doors of the house slammed. Telemane came hurrying down the steps, carrying the wizard's staff. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, the magician said. Are you ready to start? Yes, said Mendenbar. You aren't bringing that along with you, are you? Cimmerian demanded, eyeing the staff with disfavor. Of course I'm bringing it along, Telemane said. I told you how long I've been looking for one. If I leave it with Jack, odds are he'll sell it to somebody before the day is out. He wouldn't be able to help it. Here, hold this for a minute while I set up the wards. With visible reluctance, Cimmerian took the wizard's staff. She grimaced at her as her fingers touched it, as if it felt slimy and unpleasant. At the same time, Mendenbar laid a hand on his sword and pushed a tendril of magic at the staff to see whether there were any lingering spells, but he did not sense any. Raising a hand, Telemane began to mutter rapidly. Mendenbar watched with interest as the magician worked, calling up a magical power and shaping it into a loose net that surrounded all 3 of them. There, said Telemane at last, that should do it. He repossessed the staff from Cimmerian and looked at Mendenbar. Whenever you're ready. Mendenbar studied the net uncertainly. Is that all there is to it? Should I aim to one of the holes or to one of the threads? Holes, said Telemane. Threads? What are you talking about? This net of yours, Mendenbar said, the warding spell. Does it matter where I aim? You can see my warding spell? Telemane looked and sounded considerably startled by the very idea. It's not seeing exactly, Mendenbar said, but I can tell where it is and how it's put together. Fascinating, Telemann said. Have you always been able to do this? No, but it comes with being king of the enchanted forest. Does it? Telemann said, with an expression of eager interest. Can you do it for any spell? Here, let me try a listening spell. Can you see it? I thought we were supposed to be trying to get to the enchanted forest, Cimmerian put in pointedly. Can't you wait to experiment after we get Kazul? Of course, Telemann said. Do forgive me. I sometimes get carried away. He nodded apologetically, but Mendenbar thought he sounded disappointed. About this net, he reminded him. Oh, yes, aiming. It shouldn't make the least bit of difference. Good, Mendenbar said. He drew his sword, and both Telemann and Cimmerian jumped. Mendenbar supposed the sword must be leaking again. He pushed careful little dabs of power through the sword to mark Telemann and Cimmerian, to be sure that they would come along with him. Then he raised the sword and pointed it to the mountain where Jack had said the enchanted forest lay. I think I'll try to take us straight to the palace, he said, and began forming the picture in his mind. No, Telemann interrupted. Do it exactly the way you did before. That's the whole point of this exercise. I thought the point was to get us to the enchanted forest, Cimmerian muttered. Mendenbar shrugged. The castle would have been a better place from which to locate Kazul, since it was at the center, or near the center, of the enchanted forest. But once they were in the forest, getting to the castle would be no trouble. If Telemann wanted to watch the exact duplication of the transportation spell that had dumped them in the ravine, there was no reason not to let him. Releasing his image of the palace, Mendenbar substituted a mental picture of the green glass pool. He took his time over the image, painstakingly remembering every detail of the rocks and trees and water. When the picture was clear as he could make it, he took a deep breath and gave a pull to the power of his sword, slowly twisting and pulling. The mountains and the trees and Jack's odd little house faded in gray ghosts, then melted into a mist and were gone. An instant later the mist vanished, and they were standing at the edge of the green glass pool.